The year was 1945, and the Pacific sun burned low over shattered islands, casting long shadows across coral sand stained with oil and blood. Smoke rose in lazy columns from what had once been Japanese strongholds, now reduced to craters and twisted metal. The war in Europe had ended months earlier, but here in the vast ocean theater, the fight dragged on with a ferocity that seemed to defy surrender. Emperor Hirohito's voice had crackled over radios in August, announcing capitulation, yet pockets of resistance lingered like dying embers. American forces swept through the remnants, rounding up soldiers who emerged from caves, with hands raised, eyes wide with the shock of defeat. Amid this final mop-up, a lesser-noticed surrender unfolded. Women in faded khaki uniforms, their faces gaunt from months of rationed rice and relentless bombings. Stepping out from bunkers and supply depots, they had manned with quiet determination. Aiko Tanaka had never pictured herself in the midst of battle. She was 21, with black hair pinned neatly under a cap, and fingers ink-stained from years of scribbling messages in a school notebook. When she volunteered for the Women's Association for National Defense in 1942, it had been with a sense of duty drilled into her from childhood. The recruiters spoke of supporting the empire from afar, typing dispatches, operating radios, freeing men for the front lines. She would be a pillar at home, not a combatant abroad. For a time the war felt manageable. She worked in a concrete office on Okinawa, surrounded by the hume of teletypes and the sharp tang of green tea brewed weak to stretch supplies. She chatted with other girls about letters from brothers at sea, about the latest propaganda films glorifying sacrifice. But as Allied ships darkened the horizons and planes roared overhead like angry hornets, the work turned frantic. Encrypted signals, urgent pleas for ammunition that arrived too late, commanders' voices cracking over lines as islands fell one by one. By early 1945, Aiko's unit was entrenched on a small atoll south of the main island chain, a forgotten outpost ringed by palm trees, shredded by shrapnel. Nights echoed with distant explosions, the sea a black void hiding submarines and carriers. Rumors spread like wildfire through the bunkers. The Americans were island-hopping closer, the fleet unstoppable, the Emperor's divine protection faltering. Aiko clutched a small amulet from her mother, a silk pouch with a lock of family hair, and whispered prayers to ancestors she hoped still watched. She packed a meager kit, a change of undergarments, a photograph of her parents bowing before a shrine, a handful of dried seaweed. She told herself the end would bring relief, a return to normalcy. Deep down, she sensed the Empire's collapse would swallow them all. She was not alone in her service. Across the Japanese military, tens of thousands of women had been mobilized into auxiliary roles. Some nursed the wounded in field hospitals, others cooked meager meals in forward kitchens, many more handled communications or anti-aircraft spotters. They were the unsung backbone, vowed to loyalty until death. Yet as defeat loomed, they were abandoned in the chaos. Official records would later estimate over 100,000 women in uniform by war's end. Few trained for combat, but all caught in its merciless tide. The morning the Americans landed, Aiko and her comrades were ordered to burn documents. They fed stacks of papers into oil drums, flames leaping high and filling the bunker with acrid smoke that made eyes water and throats burn. Officers shouted final commands, then slipped away into the jungle under cover of dawn. No goodbye, no contingency, just vanishing shadows. By midday, Marine landing craft grated onto the beach, ramps dropping with mechanical clangs. Aiko stood with arms raised, heart pounding against her ribs, the other women mirroring her stance in a ragged line. Some wept openly, others stared blankly at the approaching figures in camouflage. The Marines yelled in English, a barrage of sounds foreign and intimidating. A few Japanese interpreters tried to negotiate, but were waved silent and pushed to their knees in the sand. Aiko braced for the worst. Propaganda had painted the enemy as demons, rapers of Nanjing, bombers of civilians. Instead, the soldiers patted them down efficiently, removing insignia pins with rough tugs, tossing them into the surf. One Marine snatched her seaweed packet, examined it curiously, then handed it back with a shrug. They herded the women toward waiting trucks, gestures sharp but not vicious, like corralling stray animals. Aiko climbed aboard, sand gritting between her toes and worn sandals, and sat knee to knee with strangers, the engine rumbling to life beneath them. Hana Sato, a petite radio operator with a scar from a childhood fall, sat across from Aiko on that bumpy ride. Hana had joined to escape an arranged marriage in her rural village, drawn by the allure of adventure and imperial glory. Now she gripped the truck's side rail, knuckles white, and murmured to Aiko in a voice steady despite the fear. "They do not seem like beasts." Aiko managed a faint nod, but words stuck in her throat. The truck bounced over rutted paths, palms whipping past in blurs of green. Their destination was no formal prison, just a makeshift enclosure on a cleared patch of coral near the beachhead. Barbed wire looped hastily around stakes, glinting under a relentless sun, the ground a mix of sand and crushed shell that shifted underfoot. A few tents sagged in the heat, offering scant shade, no cots, no latrines in sight. The guards, Marines with sun-reddened faces and M1 rifles slung casually, looked battle-worn themselves. They directed the women to one section with pointed fingers. An interpreter, speaking halting Japanese through a megaphone, declared they would be held pending processing and transport. No details on duration or conditions. The first afternoon blurred in heat and uncertainty. Aiko huddled with Hana and a cluster of others, sharing sips from canteens that tasted of metal and chlorine. One woman retched from exhaustion. Another rocked silently humming a lullaby. Dusk brought a brief cooling breeze off the sea, but night amplified every sound, waves crashing, guards' boots crunching on shell. Aiko tried to rest leaning against a tent pole, body aching from the day's tension. She thought of her family's farm, the rice paddies golden in harvest, and how surrender was supposed to end the nightmare. Instead, it introduced a new one, of waiting under alien skies, throat parched, belly tightening with hunger. In the following days, more captives trickled in, mostly men, emaciated soldiers emerging from hideouts with sunken cheeks and tattered uniforms. They were segregated by a sagging rope line, though Aiko glimpsed them shuffling past, some collapsing in the sand. The Marines appeared stretched thin, ships unloaded supplies erratically, patrols came and went. Food was doled out inconsistently, a scoop of rice one meal, canned beans the next, often skipped entirely. The women learned to ration bites, to approach the wire cautiously when a guard lingered, eyes pleading without words. Some Marines flicked cigarettes or hardtack over the barrier. Others averted gazes, bound by orders or indifference. One twilight, a young corporal with freckles and a Midwest drawl, paused near where Aiko sat cross-legged. His helmet shadowed tired eyes, his uniform salt-stained. He fumbled with a canteen cup, then extended it through the wire. "Water," he grunted. The word mangled but intent clear. Aiko took it with both hands, the liquid cool and precious sliding down her dust-dry throat. She bowed slightly in thanks, searching for English words that eluded her. He nodded awkwardly and moved on. That simple act disrupted her more than the landing had. The enemy was meant to be inhuman, yet here was a boy who could have been a fisherman from her coastal village, offering sustenance unasked. It tilted her world off its axis. Hana, watching from afar, later cautioned in a low tone, "Guard your heart, favors come with strings." Pickett pondered the warning, but could not yet grasp its depth. Not every interaction was benign. Another guard, stocky with a perpetual smirk, lobbed rotten fruit cores at the women, chuckling as they dodged or scrambled. His eyes roamed freely, lingering on curves beneath threadbare clothes. When one woman glared back, he mimed a crude gesture. Authority permeated the air like humidity. Thick and oppressive, Aiko began to sense Hana's meaning. By week's end, the women were transformed. Uniforms hung loose on frames whittled by scarcity, hair unkempt, skin sallow, conversation dwindled to whispers, movements conserved for essentials. Survival demanded vigilance, interpreting a guard's mood from a glance or posture. Some faded into obscurity. Others, the more audacious, bartered smiles or small services for extras. The undercurrent grew undeniable. In this limbo, norms frayed, desperation ruled. One night, a tropical storm lashed the enclosure, rain slashing sideways, turning sand to muck that clung like glue. Aiko huddled under a shared poncho, shivering as thunder rolled. Headlights pierced the downpour. A jeep skidding to a halt near the women's area. Two figures emerged, one with officer bars glinting wetly. They conferred in rapid English, then the officer scanned the group with a flashlight beam. It settled on Aiko. She stiffened as a guard waded through mud, gesturing imperiously. Hana gripped her wrist momentarily, release reluctant. Aiko rose on unsteady legs, water streaming from her clothes, and trailed the guard to the vehicle. The officer appraised her briefly, uttered words lost to the wind, then indicated the passenger seat. She paused, rain blurring vision, The guard's grasp on her elbow urged compliance, not harsh but insistent. The Jeep lurched forward, tires spinning in sludge before gaining traction. They drove beyond the wire, past flickering lanterns into impenetrable dark. Aiko's pulse thundered in her ears. Destination unknown, purpose veiled. She considered jumping, but the storm and unfamiliar terrain quashed the notion. After an eternity of jolting, the Jeep halted at a Quonset hut, repurposed as headquarters, sandbags stacked against its curve. The officer alighted and beckoned. Inside, the air was stifling with lantern glow and the scent of damp canvas and coffee. Maps pinned to walls, a field radio crackling faintly. The officer faced her, enunciating slowly in broken Japanese gleaned from phrase books. U-type, radio. Aiko nodded, comprehension dawning. He pointed to a corner desk with a portable typewriter, stacks of forms beside it. He introduced himself as Lieutenant Brooks, then added with deliberate care, "Here work, eat, safe." The assurance hung ambiguous, a lifeline laced with implication. Aiko seated herself, fingers hovering over keys slick with rain. Hunger clawed her insides, but the hut's relative dryness and faint warmth from a kerosene heater offered respite. Brooks poured coffee from a thermos, black and bitter, placing it nearby. She eyed it warily. The mug, the man, the sidearm at his hip. He returned to his cot, poring over dispatches. For the first time since the beach, breath came easier, though laced with wariness. Yet security in 1945 was illusory, a veneer over power's raw edge. Aiko sensed it as she pecked at keys, transcribing inventory lists, troop dispositions. The lieutenant's domain sustained her, but at the cost of autonomy, her presence contingent on his whim. Outside, the enclosure endured the storm's fury, oblivious that one captive had entered a shadowed pact for survival. His reigns persisted for days, transforming the compound into a quagmire, where every footfall extracted boots with sucking sounds, and the stench of mildew and human waste permeated everything. Aiko awoke each dawn on a mat in the hut's alcove, muscles cramped from the hard floor, but shielded from the deluge. Across the wire, guards in ponchos paced, faces etched with fatigue yet protected from the elements. Hunger evolved into a constant companion, eroding resolve with patient cruelty. Meals in the enclosure were erratic, a watery stew with fish heads one day, crackers the next, frequently absent. On barren days, only the gnaw of emptiness and distant sea sounds. Handad organized what little they had, apportioning morsels to the frailest, bartering with guards for matches or salt. "If we cease sharing, we cease being human," she confided to Aiko during a furtive visit to the wire. Her cheeks hollowed, lips chapped, but even Handad's resolve wavered. After a particularly vicious squall, she gazed seaward and admitted in a fractured whisper, "I dreamt of sushi, fresh from the market." Awakening to this was worse than the dream's end. The Americans grappled with victory's aftermath. Convoys delivered waves of prisoners, sailors from sunken ships, infantry from bypassed garrisons, all spectral in defeat. Guards tightened discipline as overcrowding mounted. Supplies dwindled. Transports bypassed with priority cargo. Geneva Accords existed in theory, but practice bowed to exigency. The military anticipated surrenders, but not this deluge. Tens of thousands overwhelming facilities. Systems buckled. Malnutrition claimed lives subtly. Bodies found stiff at dawn, unmourned. Aiko witnessed her first death 4 days into the rains. A teenage boy curled near the latrine trench, fingers clutching an empty can. Hours passed before removal, dragged unceremoniously, vanishing without trace. The indifference carved deeper than starvation. In the hut, Aiko's existence contrasted sharply, yet remained tenuous. Lieutenant Brooks assigned her clerical duties, transcribing intercepts, logging supplies, paperwork proliferating endlessly. Dryness preserved her health, sustenance, coffee, tinned spam, occasional fruit, preserved her strength. But the bargain was implicit, her utility her tether. Brooks was an enigma, polite in demeanor, detached in action. He attempted Japanese phrases, arigato, taberu, mostly communicating via gestures. Once he inquired about her pre-war life. "Family?" she replied softly. "Parents? Farm?" he acknowledged with a nod, resuming his work. His glances, when unguarded, held not threat but a profound solitude, mirroring perhaps his own isolation. Hana fared worse in the open, frame sharpening to fragility. When Aiko passed a biscuit fragment under cover of night, Hana pressed it close, voice laced with bittersweet envy. "You have heat there? Remember the price." Aiko offered no rebuttal, the cost accumulating intangibly in sidelong stares from staff, in the hush upon her entry. She was asset now, asset implied obligation. Weeks blurred, survival honing instincts. Barter flourished, a button for rice, a song for soap. Some women engaged guards flirtatiously for gain. Others averted eyes, invoking kami for invisibility. Disappearances occurred, women summoned for interrogation or labor, absent upon return. Whispers of atrocities elsewhere. Allied excesses, Japanese holdouts' vengeance. Resilience tempered fear. Ayako adapted. Acuity heightened by peril, deciphering nuances in tone or expression. One dusk, a truck roared up, a sergeant bellowing names from a sodden roster. Ayako's breath caught at Hana's. Her friend advanced, posture defiant despite quaking. Ayako approached the barrier impulsively. "Where to?" she ventured in accented English. The sergeant ignored, motioning dismissal. Hana's parting look burned fierce. Then the vehicle receded into twilight. Aiko never beheld her again. That evening, sleepless by the heater, Aiko stared at the typewriter. Digits chilled despite proximity. Brooks entered silently, bearing a bowl. He observed her distress. "Friend?" he queried gently. She affirmed with a choked nod. He paused, then offered, "Better here. Work." His gaze betrayed uncertainty. He left the bowl, steaming miso-like soup, aromatic, then withdrew. Aiko sipped, scalding yet nourishing, tears tracing silently. Resentment surged for his casual authority, the chasm of influence. Yet gratitude intertwined, primal drive to endure. War forged paradoxes in souls. By late summer, the enclosure depopulated. Vessels ferried groups to mainland holding areas, or repatriation points. Women tallied departures, speculating fates. Aiko remained in the hut, bond to Brooks' orbit strengthening inversely. She gleaned fragments of him, hailing from California, former teacher, drafted from classroom to command. But motivations for her retention eluded. Benevolence, utility, isolation. He abstained from impropriety. Yet tenure implied entitlement. One crisp morning post-frost that jeweled the sand, Brooks summoned her from duties. Face lined, tone subdued. "Camp closes soon," he conveyed. "Many leave." Her heart clenched, anticipating expulsion, but he negated. "You stay, help safer." Explanation unnecessary, reprieve and confinement fused. Aiko ventured out, observing the exodus. Women boarding transports, expressions numb with weariness, destinations veiled. She lingered at the threshold as engines thrummed, sensing stares, envious, reproachful. Impulse urged pursuit, rejection of this anomalous haven. But privation and dread anchored her. Security was confinement she dared not forsake. As vehicles faded in dust clouds, the site emptied, tension undiminished. A lone sentry eyed her inscrutably. She re-entered, hands quivering though warmed. Brooks hunched over charts, murmuring without uplift. Peace comes. Then pause heavy, for you delayed. Aiko petrified. Resonance chilling. Exterior breeze stirred palms softly. War waned broadly, but in this intimate detention, a profounder peril germinated. Autumn winds swept the atoll, carrying scents of salt and decaying vegetation, cooling the air where heat had oppressed. Official armistice reverberated globally, parades in distant capitals, yet for Aiko, tranquility remained elusive, filtered through constraints. She sustained, nourished, sheltered from external tumult, but liberty was absent. It was accord, delicate, tacit. Lieutenant Brooks evolved with seasons. In summer, vigilance defined him, commander amid conflict. By fall, languor supplanted, holstered weapon indoors omitted. Smiles emerged, faint, fatigued. He shared unprompted recollections, ocean swims back home. A brother in the Marines, scent of orange groves. Aiko attended, responding tentatively. English progressing haltingly. He avoided her wartime role. She volunteered nothing. Mutuality and reticence safer. Yet closeness bred unintended familiarity. She managed correspondence, organized files, tended the heater. He provided provisions surreptitiously. A banana, bread slice fresh. Initially, acceptance flushed her with shame. Subsequently, resignation. Hierarchy evident, he directed. She complied. Beneath, subtlety stirred, unnamed tension. Aiko perceived it in quiet nights, hut silence save insect drone and key strikes. Glimpsing upward, his stare met hers. not malevolent but probing solitude. His eyes echoed her void, not caloric but connective, affirmation of humanity. That yearning alarmed beyond animosity. Animosity straightforward, this labyrinthine, one gloaming, he invited repose, not labor. Sun dipped behind jagged palms, gilding interior amber. He dispensed tea, sweet and scarce, proffering cup. Safe? He inquired clumsily. Aiko deliberated. Query or caveat? Safer than enclosure, she conceded. He assented, gaze distant, fingers tapping, then murmured, War forges odd alliances. She recalled Hannah, engulfed by obscurity, recalled famished visages, erstwhile authoritarians reduced to supplicants. Odd alliances, poignant and acrid, external intelligence filtered, camps dissolved elsewhere, detainees dispatched homeward or to labor details. Here chronology elongated, personnel rotated, newcomers boisterous. One, Private Jenkins, tall and eager, noted Aiko promptly. His Japanese fractured yet enthusiastic. He bantered passing, tendered smokes broadly grinning. Brooks observed initially mute, but when Jenkins protracted near her station, Brooks's interjection sliced keenly. Sufficient. Jenkins retreated chuckling, but Brooks' glare brooked no levity. Thereafter, Aiko comprehended guardianship. Guardianship equating assertion. It repelled Jenkins, deterred incursions, yet forged fetters unbreakable. Benevolence authentic, enclosure authentic, concurrent. She queried Brooks's intent inwardly. No advances, no coercion, yet stares protracted, gifts laden with subtext. Perhaps not carnal, but existential grasp amid ruin, possession nonetheless. Aiko acclimated necessarily. She acknowledged tea graciously, maintained demeanor demure, expressed thanks for edibles and linguistic aid. She navigated gratitude survival interstice, accepting essentials sans provocation. Daily she equilibrated that precipice. Aware miscalculation, rebellion, misinterpretation, denial could shatter sanctuary. Beyond hut, Japan staggered under yoke. Islands scarred by firestorms, civilians in exodus recounting plunder, violation. Even Americans, pledged to decorum, succumbed sporadically. Tales of barters carnal for rations, exigency morphing predation. Aiko absorbed as blade's edge, appreciative of Brooks's mute bulwark, albeit daunting. The defining instant arrived one humid afternoon. Aiko typed as Brooks conferred with arrivals, officers ebullient with triumph. One espied her, leered, commented eliciting guffaws. Brooks tensed, retorted brusquely. Atmosphere thickened, sultry and charged. The officer persisted smirking, extended beckoning hand. Brooks rose instantaneously, timbre subdued yet deadly. Mine. Hush absolute, smile wavered. Officer relented muttering. Discourse resumed haltingly, but axis altered irrevocably. Agiko persisted typing, tremors betraying, claim constricted, safeguard and dominion intertwined. That night, Brooks taciturn, he imbibed solitary, contemplating partitions till obscurity. Aiko by heater, ambivalent gratitude or trepidation. She opted silence. Implication outweighed utterance. On her palate, insomnia prevailed. Ceiling scrutinized, War's covert packs pondered, Hana's absence, Jenkins' leer, Brooks' resolute mine, each pivoted survival, dignity bartered security, authority masked solicitude, purity evaporated. Exterior, waves lapped rhythmically, fragile melody against void, endeavoring serenity. Interior, Aiko discerned with abrupt lucidity security endured via Brooks's vigilance its captivity variant. Subsequent dawn, he saluted courteously, alteration feigned. But at desk sensing oversight, she recognized paper truce, yet personal sovereignty contest initiated. When final vessels arrived for remnants, air redolent petrol and heated sand, September. Sky azure over fractured landscape. Aiko positioned exterior hut, grasping kit diminished by time, enclosure dismantled, terrain barren. Triumph bureaucratized. Military cataloged spoils human, adjudicating trajectories. Lieutenant Brooks accompanied, gait leisurely, hands pocketed in weathered attire. He appeared aged, contours eased by cessation. Westbound ship, he stated softly, Japanese refined marginally. Enclosure terminates. His scrutiny sought emotion, alleviation, appreciation, perhaps remorse. Aiko experienced amalgam indistinct. Solely void akin, caged avian liberated abruptly. She yearned querying retention rationale. safeguard, assertion sans transgression. Duty, longing, seclusion. Queries atrophied. She inclined instead. Arigato, she whispered. Thank you, submerged ineffable. Brooks' mandible clenched. Instantaneously, he seemed poised elaboration. Then officer resurged, concise affirmation. Secure now, he breathed. Less vow than aspiration. Voyage westward protracted bizarre. Aiko aboard crammed with sorority, some enclosure veterans, others endured graver. They attenuated, muted, edged beyond initial enlistees crisp, dialogue segmented, narratives incongruent, starvation nocturnes, abrupt benevolence, perfidy, compacts. Hana's designation uttered once, dissolved, unspoken. Path flanked devastation. Charred hamlets, eviscerated ports, denizens hollow observing processions. Japan no polity, lesion. At Yokohama Vicinity Depot, women funneled pavilions. Queries ensued. Designations, affiliations, imperial involvement probes. Aiko veracity selective, omission strategic, interrogator weary, expediting documentation. Promptly liberated. No adjudication, no castigation, merely embossed parchment homeward sanction. Home nebulous, she departed attired, ration allotment, village semi-destroyed upon repatriation. Mother serendipitously viable, sobbed embracing. Inquiries withheld. Locals glanced tacit. Postbellum Japan, mutinous endurance. Uniformed females embarrassment evaded. Aiko swiftly obscured history. Asserted clerical retreat ensnared. Omitted mire, privation, wire, unequivocally hut and arbiter of vitality or famine. Yet silhouette persisted. Nocturnally, typewriter cadence dreamt, coffee acumen, charts, timbre declaring mine. Occasionally gratitude awakened. Alternately, ire vehement quaking. He salvaged conditionally, constructed refuge authority. She famished terrified acquiesced. Seasons to enums. Japan reconstructed. Cicatrices overlaid mortar amnesia. Aiko wedded benevolent unaware wartime beyond infantile scarcity. Progeny birthed, grinned scholastic processions. But internalized perpetually security enclosure. Authority benevolent yet constrictive. Epochs hence, inquiries surfaced regarding females' imperial conflict. Scholars exhumed annals. Aiko moot, incinerated unsent epistle to Brooks. Sought neither compassion nor condemnation. Coveted narrative proprietorship, albeit cerebral seclusion. Yet occasionally nocturnal hush. Revisited departure. Sun merciless, shadows stark courtyard. Brooks pocketed, voiceless engine ignition. Gazes converged unguarded instant. Fraught, unspoken, stranded. Necessity, dominion, endurance, affection, semblance, liberty, antithesis. Then lurch. Instant dust engulfed. Aiko beheld him nevermore. Ignorant repatriation, intact or fractured. Confided typist, borrowed tongue. Solely cognizant interchange branded profounder starvation terror. Inculcated disquieting verity. Conflicts conclude messily. Bequeath obligations. Pacts, fetters, unseen mercy forged. Evening, Tokyo's debris illuminated neon. Youth frolicked plazas novel. Aiko windowside, matured. Observed luminescence where obscurity reigned. Reflected vows, tacit sustainers. Reflected authority multifaceted, savage, gentle, defensive, acquisitive, comprehended, crystalline chilling, endurance, necessitated capitulation, capitulation hers, commemorate post-society, feigned tabula rasa, in serenity, conflict distant life, reconstructed, fathomed ultimate verity, liberty not merely wire absence, occasionally valor recollect once keyholder. The years following the war reshaped the world in ways that felt both miraculous and merciless, with cities rising from ashes like phoenixes determined to forget their burns. Aiko settled into a rhythm that mimicked normalcy, waking before dawn to tend a small garden behind the rebuilt house, her hands in soil that still held fragments of shrapnel if one dug deep enough. Her husband Kenji, a quiet man who had spent the war in a factory far from the fronts, asked no questions about the gaps in her stories, content with the children who filled the rooms with laughter and the steady income from his clerk position. But in the quiet moments when the house slept and the cicadas droned outside, Aiko's mind wandered back to the atoll, to the hut, to the man who had uttered words that bound her more tightly than any chain. She wondered if Brooks had returned to his California orchards, if he had married, if he ever thought of the Japanese girl who had typed his world into order amid chaos. The thought brought no comfort, only a dull ache of unresolved debt. In the broader sweep of history, the stories of women like Aiko were buried under grander narratives of battles and bombings, emperors and generals. Archives mention them in footnotes, statistics of auxiliaries captured, but the personal toll, the intimate negotiations of survival, remained unspoken. Aiko carried it alone, a secret weight that shaped her caution with authority, her fierce protection of her daughter's freedoms. She taught them to bow politely, but to question quietly, to value independence as the truest security. Decades passed, and the Pacific Islands greened over scars, tourists now lounging where blood had soaked the sand. Aiko, gray-haired and stooped, visited a museum once, staring at faded photographs of enclosures much like hers. A display noted the treatment of female POWs, clinical words about rations and repatriation. She turned away, the official version too clean, too devoid of the human tangle. Back home, she sat with tea cooling in her cup, remembering the first time Brooks had said more than orders. It was a night when a typhoon warning had emptied the beaches, wind howling like ancestral spirits. He had paced the hut, radio spitting static, then stopped to offer her a blanket from his own pack. Cold, he said simply. She had wrapped it around her shoulders, the wool smelling of him, of tobacco and salt. No thanks expected, but the gesture lingered, a thread in the web. From there conversations grew, halting at first, pieced together from dictionaries and gestures. He spoke of teaching history to boys who now fought across oceans, of lessons on democracy that felt ironic in their circumstance. She shared fragments of haiku her father loved, poems of seasons changing inexorably. "War makes teachers of us all," he once mused, and she nodded. Understanding the lesson empowers many disguises. Yet power it was, and as the camp emptied further, his claim became more pronounced in subtle ways. He assigned her better quarters within the hut, a screen for privacy. He ensured her rations included extras, chocolate perhaps smuggled from a care package. When other officers visited, boisterous with liquor, his posture shifted protectively. Conversation steered away from her. One such night, a major with a flushed face had joked about local customs, eyes on Aiko. Brooks had stood, voice even but firm. "She's staff, essential." The major backed down, but the air crackled with unspoken challenge. Later alone, Brooks had apologized in his way, a rare vulnerability. Can't let them think otherwise. She had nodded, heart complicated by the protection that isolated her further. Isolation bred dependence, dependence a quiet resentment. She began to test boundaries small, asking for books, for news of the world beyond. He provided, dog-eared novels, newspapers yellowed with age. In return, she translated local dialects from intercepted messages, her skill sharpening his intelligence. It was partnership of sorts, but always on his terms. The title's words came not in drama, but in quiet conversation one evening, as stars pierced the sky like promises. They sat outside the hut for the first time, on crates under a canopy of palms, the enclosure nearly deserted now, wire rolled away like forgotten history. Repatriation ships loomed on the horizon, silhouettes against sunset. Brooks smoked a cigarette, offering her one which she declined politely. Soon, he said, "You'll go home. Rebuild." The word home felt foreign after months of limbo. She stared at the sea, waves whispering secrets. "And you?" she asked, English smoother now. "Back to teaching, maybe. Family waiting." He paused, then turned to her, eyes reflecting fire from a distant lantern. "I will marry you," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if long held. "If you stay, America. New life." The proposal hung between them, absurd in context, profound in implication. Not conquest, but genuine offer. Born of loneliness and the bond forged in extremity. Aiko's breath caught. Marriage meant escape from Japan's ruins, from judgment of her uniform past. It meant security without question, a future untainted. But it meant leaving everything, surrendering identity to his world, becoming the war bride stories whispered about. She searched his face for jest, found only earnest fatigue. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you're strong. Because in this mess, you made sense. Because I see you, not the enemy. You." The sincerity pierced her. In another time, perhaps affection could bloom purely. Here it was entangled with power, with the hut's walls, with the memory of starvation outside. She thought of Hana, of the women who had vanished into trucks, of the bargains that saved or damned. "Thank you," she said finally, voice steady. "But I must go home, my family, my land." He nodded slowly, hurt flickering, then masked. Understand. But the offer lingered, a fork in her path not taken. The next days were awkward, kindness undimmed but edged with regret. He arranged her passage on an early transport, paper stamped priority. As the ship pulled away, she stood on deck, wind whipping her hair, watching the atoll shrink. Brooke stood on the dock, small figure waving once. She raised her hand in return, a goodbye heavy with what-ifs. The voyage home was a haze of crowded decks and shared stories, women piecing together fractured lives, disembarking in a port bustling with reconstruction. Aiko felt the ground solid underfoot. Japan hers again, though changed. She found her village, mother thinner but alive, father gone to illness in the war's final months. They embraced without words, the silence a bridge over gaps. Life resumed in patches. She worked in a school teaching English ironically, the language of her captivity now a tool for progress. Kenji entered her life through a mutual acquaintance, his gentleness a balm. Their wedding was simple, cherry blossoms falling like forgiveness. Children came, a boy with her eyes, a girl with Kenji's smile. Prosperity grew with the economy, televisions bringing images of America that stirred memories. Aiko watched news of veterans, wondered about Brooks if he had found peace. One day a letter arrived, postmarked California, handwriting familiar. She opened it with trembling fingers. It spoke of return to teaching, of a wife and daughters, of gratitude for the humanity she had shown him in dark times. No mention of the proposal, only well wishes for her happiness. She burned it in the garden, ashes mixing with soil, closure and smoke. Years later, when grandchildren asked about the war, she told sanitized tales of resilience, of kindness amid hardship. The deeper truths she kept locked, a private archive. In her final days, bedridden but lucid, she gazed at the ceiling much like the huts, remembering the soldier's words, "I will marry you." Not a command but a choice offered, one she had refused to reclaim herself. Freedom, she understood then, was in the refusing, in the remembering without bitterness. The war had taken much, but it had not taken her soul's ownership. As breath faded, she smiled faintly, the atoll's waves echoing in her mind. A lullaby of survival and sovereignty. The legacy of those months rippled through generations subtly. Her daughter, strong-willed and educated, became a journalist challenging authority, unknowingly echoing Aiko's quiet defiance. The boy joined the self-defense forces but advocated for peace, carrying forward the lesson of war's cost. Grandchildren learned respect for history's shadows, visiting memorials with bowed heads. Aiko's story, untold in full, lived in their independence, in the way they questioned power's faces. In the end, the U.S. soldier's words became not a chain but a catalyst, propelling her toward a life self-determined. The Pacific sun set on her era, but the light of her courage endured, a beacon in the narrative of forgotten women who navigated captivity to claim their freedom.